Hey guys, welcome to my Elemental Shaman guide for World of Draenor, patch 6.2.3. In this guide I'm going to go over the basics of DPSing in a PvE or raid setting on an LA Shaman. And I'll start by going over talents and glyphs that you should be choosing in different situations, and then the abilities you'll actually be using, including both your damage and your utility and CC. And then I will go ahead and show you how it works on these dummies here, both an AoE and single target. And then maybe mention some specific cases where you could change things up in the current tier, Hellfire Citadel. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on talents and glyphs. So first we've got, in the first tier, we have Nature's Guardian, is the one that you will pick by default. It's passive, so you don't really have to do anything with it. And when you go below 30%, it gives you extra health for a few seconds, and reduces your threat. But it only procs once every 30 seconds, so it's completely passive, don't worry about it. You dip below in a huge damage phase, it procs, and you don't even think about it. So that's why it's the go-to. If you know there's damage that comes every minute or so, you can use Astral Shift instead, or 1.5 minutes. So every 3 minutes or 1.5 minutes, anything like that, or every 2 minutes. You can use it. It's 40% reduction for 6 seconds. It's really good, but it is an extra button. So if you're just starting out, you might not want to pick this right away, but it can be useful on certain things. And Stone Bulwark Totem, not really useful. It gives you a shield, but it doesn't do that much. So either the percent reduction or passive health boost when you get low is better. In the next tier, you have 3 CC type abilities. You don't want to go Frozen Power generally because as an LA Shami, using Frost Shock, which is what this requires, puts a cooldown on your other 2 main abilities, Flame Shock and Earth Shock, and you want to use those, so you don't want to have to use something else. Earth Grab is a root totem. It can be useful, other people do it better, and generally there's not that much to root on a boss fight, so you already have a slow anyway with Earthbind Totem, which we'll get to in a bit. So in general, I like to take Windwalk Totem, which is a raid-wide freedom, which means people can move even if they're normally slowed. So say on Iron Reaver, if you get hit by an oil slick or something, you can windwalk and everyone can just walk out of it. It's really nice, short cooldown, and it's just really good for the raid in general. In the next tier talent, I like to go Call of the Elements. It's a 3-minute cooldown. It resets the cooldown on all your generic totems, all the ones that aren't cooldowns, so basically anything except your DPS totem. And it can be useful if you need like extra healing or an extra stun or an extra fear immunity somewhere. It's pretty simple and I like it a lot. Deterring Persistence, I don't really use. There's not that many it's really not many times you want 2 totems of the same class. And then Projection is more of a PvP thing. You can use it if you want to move totems, but it's not that useful, I find. In general, if you place your totems smartly. So, and then the next tier is an actual DPS tier of talents. Elemental Mastery. Before you get your class trinket, if you're going single target, this is the talent you would pick. You just match it up with your 2-minute cooldown that you already have by default, and it gives you extra haste. Pretty simple. Pop it, more damage. Ancestral Swiftness, just not quite as good. Right now, it's a passive haste buff, and it makes your next spell instant, and it's just not super good right now. Echo the Elements, you will always pick for AoE because it gives you 2 charges of Earthquake, which is your biggest AoE ability, and also Lava Burst for extra single target. But once you get your class trinket, you'll pair it up with, you'll see down here, this talent, but for single target. So once you get your class trinket, which is this, the Core of Primal Elements, whatever difficulty you get it on from Archimonde in Hellfire Citadel, then you will switch that. But single target, Elemental Mastery, AoE, Echo. Once you get your class trinket, then Echo for both. I like anyway. In the next tier, it's healing talents. Rushing Stream is not worth your healing stream totem, doesn't do enough. Conductivity, you rarely use Healing Rain. So not that great. Ancestral Guidance, really simple. You fire and forget, you press the button, you get extra healing while you DPS. And it's not even on the global, so you don't waste a spell, you just hit it in between your spells, and you go off and you help your raid. It's like a raid cooldown. Alright, then the next tier, all 3 of these talents are DPS boost. They all perform quite well, like really close to each other in single target, so you can pick whichever one you like. But for AoE generally, or with a lot of movement, Primal Elementalist is better, and that's why I like to just go pick this instead. It's again passive, and it's really fire and forget. You pop one of your big totems, your fire elemental mostly, and it just does more damage. So it's really easy to use, and it's better in AoE anyway than the other two, so I really recommend this one. Elemental Blast, you have to work into your rotation. It's an extra button every 12 seconds, which can be really annoying, and if you have to move, it really screws you over. And in Hellfire Citadel, there's a lot of movement. And then Unleash Fury, you can use, it just means you use this button, your Unleash Flame, which turns into Unleash Fury. You use it more often on cooldown, so again, it's kind of another extra button you have to use more often than you would without. So I recommend this Primal Elementalist. And the last tier, if you're going AoE, Liquid Magma is generally your only choice, as long as you can get it off every time it's on cooldown in an AoE situation. And it just, from your fire totem, it spews a bunch of stuff, magma, and does splash damage to everything it hits, so it's really good for AoE. Before you get your class trinket, this one again, the core of Primal Elements, you want to use Storm Elemental Totem on a pure single fight. And it's just another totem, you use it, it's got a big cooldown, 5 minutes, and then you just pop that and your fire totem, and then you just do your regular rotation. So it doesn't really change much, you just have an extra big totem to use, along with your fire elemental. And then once you get your class trinket, instead use Elemental Fusion, which every time you Lava Burst, you get this buff that stacks, and it increases the next damage of your shock by 40%, and you can stack twice. So the best way is you'll be using this to get a super buffed Flame Shock, which with this trinket lasts a really long time and does a lot of damage, and that gives you a lot of extra damage. The other procs you get of it while you don't put that keep applying that dot is just going to be used on Earth Shock, just a little extra passive damage. It's pretty easy to use. And so those are the tier talents for Elemental Shaman. Now if you look over the glyphs, there's a lot of options, a lot of cool options for utility, self-healing and things like that, so it's kind of up to you and per fight what you prefer. So for big AoE fights, where there's a lot of AoE and more than 3 adds that you'll be constantly hitting, this Chain Lightning Glyph is really good and practically mandatory for extra damage. It allows your Chain Lightning spell to hit 5 people total, but it deals a little bit less damage. Overall, if you have 5 things you're hitting, it's a DPS boost. If you have less than that, it's a DPS loss. So, get used to the fight, figure out where this is useful, and where it's not. Fire Elemental Totem, some people recommend if you can't DPS straight for a minute, it reduces the cooldown to 2.5 minutes instead of 5, but also reduces the duration to 30 seconds instead of 1 minute. I can't think of any fight off the top of my head where you would want to use this, so I don't necessarily recommend it, but it is there if you want a shorter cooldown, shorter duration cooldown. Glyph Flame Shock is pretty nice, it's a self-sustain, especially once you get your class trinket. Your Flame Shock starts doing a lot more and lasts a lot longer. And so the healing it can do is pretty nice. I don't personally use it, but it is there and it is quite nice. Right now I have this glyph of Grounding Totem. It turns your Grounding Totem to reflect. It's not that useful in raid. I just have it because of dungeons, mythic dungeons, challenge modes, things like that. One here is really good, Healing Stream Totem. I highly recommend in most fights. If you drop Healing Stream to help your raid heal a little bit, it also reduces the elemental damage you take from fire, frost, and nature by 10%, which is actually pretty useful. Hex, if you need to CC, but generally other people are better at it than you are, so not the biggest deal. Lightning Shield Glyph is the buff you be putting on yourself, and this makes you take less damage when it gets triggered, so basically when you get hit, you take less damage for 6 seconds, 10%. Could be nice, self-sustain. And then we got this glyph I use, again for mostly dungeons and such, but it's pretty good. Shamanistic Rage is your only defensive cooldown, besides your first tier talent. And this glyph makes you dispel a magic effect on yourself when you use it, so it can be pretty nice for some fights, or some trash where you get debuffed. Just be careful that you don't accidentally dispel something that you're not supposed to. There's also this glyph of Shamanistic Resolve, which makes your cooldown do twice as much, so 60% reduction, but the cooldown becomes 2 minutes instead of 1. I can't think of a fight where there's something big every 2 minutes and not every 1 minute or less, so I don't recommend it, but it is there if you like a bigger cooldown on a longer cooldown. And everything else is kind of Unstable Earth. If you're doing ghosts on Socrathar, if you're responsible for that, it can be useful because it makes your Earthquake also slow. And if they get out of the fire that the construct pulls down, then you might want to use this. Other than that, everything else is kind of meh. There's one that increases the duration of your cast while moving ability by 5 seconds. Generally, you shouldn't need anything. You shouldn't need more than 15 seconds already that you get from it. But it is there if you need it. And then if you want a shorter stun charge up for your Capacitor Totem, then you can use this glyph. In general, I would recommend maybe Flame Shock if you need healing, Healing Stream Totem for the raid, and maybe Lightning Shield or Shamanistic Rage. Alright, and with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the abilities you have as an Elemental Shaman. For DPS, your biggest, most important thing is Flame Shock. It's a dot that you put on a target, and it does a little damage and then it just ticks away. What's important about it is sometimes it'll proc another one of your main abilities, Lava Burst. And this is your big hit. It always crits. It does more damage to things with Flame Shock, so try not to Lava Burst things without your Flame Shock dot on it. And Flame Shock will sometimes proc free and instant casts of this. So, and then you also have Lightning Bolt, which is kind of your filler spell. And in certain situations, you will end up using Earth Shock as well. You have Unleash Flame here, and this empowers your next fire spell, and it's really only useful if you're at the start of the fight, because there's nothing else, like before the fight starts, just to buff your very first Flame Shock. And also, when you're reapplying Flame Shocks, when you have the class trinket. Before you get this, it's really not worth using this past the pre-pull. And then we've got for AoE, we have a Searing Totem, which you always want to have down. So you always want to have a Fire Totem down to do damage. Either Searing Totem or when you're using your cooldown, Fire Elemental Totem. You can't have both. So if you use one and then use the other, it'll cancel the first one. So be sure once this is active that you don't accidentally hit your Searing Totem. So you have your 2 Fire Totems, and I'm not going to pop this now, so you don't have to wait 5 minutes for it to come back up. Then you also have Ascendance, which is your big DPS cooldown. You can use it every 2 minutes, and it basically lets you spam a Lava Burst. So we'll get to that in a bit. And then you have this buff, Lightning Shield, which you just always want to have on you. It lasts an hour, and sometimes it resets on its own, but just make sure you have it up. It's very important. And then you have a bunch of utility spells. You have your defensive cooldown here, Shamanistic Rage. It's a 1 minute cooldown, reduces the damage you take 30%, 15 seconds, very good. And it's really useful. You've got your spell, offensive dispel, so if you need to dispel something off of a boss, an ad, something like that, go ahead and use this, and it is spammable. You have Hex, which is like it's a CC. You can use it on humans or beasts, but it's just not that great. It's got a 45-second cooldown. Other classes do it better, like mages, hunters, and so on, rogues. But it's there if you need it. You have Spirit Walker's Grace, which allows you to cast while moving for a minute or for 15 seconds. It's on a 2 minute cooldown. You have Thunderstorm to knock stuff back. You technically do use this for AoE, but only if there's 10 or more targets, which doesn't really happen ever. So I just don't use it. I recommend not using it. You have Wind Shear, which is your interrupt. If your raid leader asks you to interrupt something, this is what you'll be using. You've got your Stun Totem. You drop it, and then 5 seconds later, it blows up around it and stuns everything in there. You have Healing Stream Totem for a little raid healing. Tremor Totem for anything that you get feared on. It doesn't really happen much in Hellfire. The trash before Tyrant Valhari you can use to help the raid out, but it's not really useful in the boss fight. And then for AoE, you have Chain Lightning, which hits 3 people. And then you've got Earthquake, which puts down this little area of effect, and I'll show you over here. And it just does damage constantly, and sometimes knocks like little adds down and things like that. Alright, and then you also have your tier talents, which we'll get into, and Ghost Wolf for faster movement, which you can just use to get out of stuff faster. So 30% movement speed is pretty nice. And then you have a couple of heals. You can use Healing Surge. I like to keep in case I get low for some reason, but generally not use that often. And then we got Cleanse Spirit if you need to dispel a curse, which comes up on Mana Wrath in the first phase. You can be the one to dispel, like Mark of Doom, or whatever it's called, that one of the summoners puts out. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so as far as single target goes, what you're going to want to do is basically keep your Flame Shock up on the target, and when you have them, Lava Burst. Just Lava Burst as much as you can. With Echo you get two of these, so just spam those away, and any free procs you get, use right away. And what will happen is, doing that, after that you spam Chain Light or Lightning Bolt until you hit 20 stacks or so, anywhere from 17 to 20 stacks of Lightning Shield. And then when that happens, you will use Earth Shock to get rid of those stacks so you don't waste stacks. And basically just makes your Earth Shock do a lot more damage. And you want to use it when it's full, like 20, but if you're at 20 and you're firing off maybe like another Lava Burst or another Lightning Bolt, you could proc another one, but it'll be wasted because it's already full at 20 stacks. So 17 to 20, you can use it before it actually gets to that point, before you waste any stacks. And that is essentially how single target DPS goes. Again, at the start of the fight you'll use, or any big DPS phase like where you hero or Bloodlust, you will use your Fire Elemental Totem instead of your Searing Totem, but just have a Fire Totem out all the time. And when you have Echo of the Elements and Elemental Fusion, once you get 2 stacks of this, once you're done with your burst at the beginning, then you want to Unleash Flame, make sure you have 2 stacks of the fusion buff, and then put another Flame Shock on, and then just let that tick away until it gets close, and then just make sure it never falls off. So you always want to have a Flame Shock active for single target DPS. And you have your Ascendance, which lines up perfectly with the Legendary Ring. So I'll go ahead and give you a rundown of how this will be the single target DPS rotation for when you have your class trinket. And another thing to note for the tier set, the 2-piece affects your rotation a little bit. It just sometimes when you use Earth Shock, it doesn't reset your cooldown, your stacks on your Lightning Shield, so you can kind of spam it until it goes away. That's the only thing, so get rid of those Earth Shocks. The only time you might want to hold on to it, like extra stacks, is if your Flame Shock is about to go out, you want to get that on again. You don't want it to fall off, generally ever. So make sure you're getting a good Flame Shock on. The 4-piece just is a passive buff. You don't have to worry about it. When you get it, I don't have it, but when you have it, it just gives you more haste when you do stuff, when you're just doing your rotation. So don't worry about that too much. It's not going to affect your rotation. Okay, and then while we're here, actually, I'll talk about stats real briefly. The best stat you have is Multi-Strike, because when you Multi-Strike, you get procs, and procs are good and do lots of damage. And that's essentially why Multi-Strike is best. It gives you, it's every time you Multi-Strike with your Flame Shock, you can get a proc off of for Lava Burst. And every time you Multi-Strike, it gives you extra charges of Lightning Shield, so it builds up Lightning Shields faster. Your next best stat depends on what you're going for. If you want to go for an AoE build, Critical Strike is your next best. A Crit and Mastery become really good for that. And then if you're going for single target, Haste is your next best stat. Mastery just increases the damage of your Earthquake, and it also just does extra damage while you're doing damage. And then Versatility, of course, is just not very good. So try to avoid that when possible. As for the weapon enchant, one interesting thing is if this proc, so if this enchant Mark of the Frostwolf, which is the multi-strike one, puts you above 100% multi-strike, it's actually better to use another enchant like Critical Strike or Haste or Mastery, because it's not worth going over that when it procs, because it doesn't help you as much. For me, I'm pretty far down because I'm not that geared, so Mark of the Frostwolf will be best. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you guys the rotation with the trinket, class trinket right now, and then we'll go into briefly how you do it without, and then remember the talents you would take. So first of all, we start before the pull, do a countdown, 5, 4, and then around the 5 second, you will Unleash Flame, and then 3 seconds, you will pre-pot if you need to. Elemental Totem, I'm not going to use a pot though right now. Elemental Totem, Fire Alley Totem, and then pre-cast Lightning Bolt, about 2 to 3 seconds before. And then Flame Shock. So 5 seconds here, and then pre-pot, Elemental Totem, pre-cast this, and then Flame Shock. And then someone's going to probably ring, so you'll Ascendance with it, just to have it line up, and you'll spam Lava Burst. Just keep pressing that button. And you'll see right now I have a little tracker for my Lightning Shields and my Flame Shock debuff. So when it gets to about 20, so this is the free proc, here you use the Earth Shock. Now mine isn't resetting right now because of the 2-piece, but when it does, then you go back and more Lava Bursts. And then you get Lava Burst proc sometimes, and when you can't do anything else, you just Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt, oh, Lava Burst is up. I'll shoot Lava Burst, pew, and then back to the Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt, now we're at 20 stacks, so we can get rid of that with Earth Shock, and then Lava Burst again. And you just keep going like this. Now, at this point you want to check, okay, look, I have 2 stacks now. I want to Unleash Flame, this is getting kind of low, and I'll reapply Flame Shock, because my cooldowns are over, and I want to have a really big Flame Shock. Alright, and then we just keep going. And that's essentially what you do for single target. You just keep going. Now you notice my Fire Elemental Totem is gone, so I want to put down Searing Totem, because I always want a totem down. And then back to Lava Bursts. And use as many Lava Bursts as you have, as long as they have Flame Shock on them. Okay, so the procs come up, you want to use that right away. Oh, Earth Shock is up. And then keep going. So you see Elemental Fusion, like the only time you actually manage it is when you get low on the Flame Shock duration. Right now it's got over a minute left. I don't have to worry about it. It's kind of the back of my mind. I'm just shooting Lava Bursts and Earth Shocks when it gets high, and then Lightning Bolts. Just keep doing that, and that is your single target rotation, essentially. You just keep doing this. Things come back up, you pop them. And so I'll just get to the next time where we reapply Flame Shock, because that's a really important point. So right now it's getting lower, and I'm talking low, like below 15 seconds left. It's really important to start looking at it. So more Lava Burst, Lightning Bolts. Okay, now I see my cooldowns are coming up. So someone's probably going to pop Ring again, right? So I'm going to have, make sure you have your totem down, and then you're going to pop Ascendance with them to get the most out of it. You just spam Lava Burst. Now you do use Earth Shock in Ascendance if it's full, like up 20 stacks, because it's worth it. But in general, you never want to have to reapply Flame Shocks during it. Okay, so here we're getting, actually 1 second on that. So we have 2 stacks. We're really low on duration. I want to go ahead and Unleash Flame and then Flame Shock again. So you have the max power on the super long dot. But before I was saying this, during Ascendance you definitely do not want to reapply Flame Shock, because you want to just be Lava Bursting. So make sure if it's going to fall off soon, that you do go ahead and refresh it beforehand, and your totem as well. So make sure you don't have to reapply your totem, so that you can just freely Lava Burst, or if you're AoEing, Lava Beam. Okay, and so that's the single target rotation. It's generally going to be like that. I'm going to stop now. It's going to be like that even if you take the other talents. The only difference is if you don't have your trinket, you should be going Storm Elemental Totem and Elemental Mastery. And the only difference is you're just going to pop Elemental Mastery. You could even macro it into your Ascendance. And I'll put that macro, I'll just go ahead and write that out in the description below. And at the start, instead of popping your Fire Elemental Totem, you'll Unleash Flame, oh, totem stop. Unleash Flame, 4 seconds, you'll Storm Elemental Totem, 3 seconds, you'll Searing Totem, because you can have both out, since that's a Wind Totem rather than a Fire Totem. And then you'll precast. So same thing, you just kind of shove it in there. It's an extra totem. Use it. It's a higher priority than Fire Elemental, just because you can have your Searing Totem up as well. So that's the only difference with that one. And then you'll just go off do the exact same thing, except you don't have to manage your Flame Shocks like that, and you don't have to use Unleash Flame until you get that. Class trinket. Alright, and now we're going to go ahead and show you the AoE rotation. So switch talents. So we are Liquid Magma for this. I'm going to put that on my bars. And everything else is the same. And essentially what you do is you just have your totems out. Same thing with the totems. Pre-pull, you can fire LE, otherwise just use Searing. And all you're going to do is you're going to Chain Lightning, which is going to give you a proc of Earthquake, and you just put that down, does a bunch of damage, and then you're going to Chain Lightning again, and keep chain lightning and putting earthquakes down, and that is essentially what it is. That's all it is. So at Essence, I'm not even going to use Cooldown. The same thing with Ascendance. Your chain lightning turns into a different spell, but it's the same thing. So put down your totem, chain lightning, gives you a proc. You see how it lights up here. Put down an earthquake, chain lightning, and earthquakes. Now, when you get 20 stacks, you still want to get rid of those because it's like free damage. But the most important thing in the AoE is the earthquake. Chain lightning itself doesn't do much. You know, the earth shock does a decent amount, but it's the earthquake that really does the damage. If you look right now, it's 50% of my damage essentially. So you always want to, whenever you're able to, earthquake. And the way you get this proc is you have to hit at least 3 targets, which is why you don't really AoE until you have 3 targets, because you don't get these earthquake procs. And this is this is really simple AoE rotation, does a lot of damage. One important thing to note is you have to sometimes look at how the pathing of chain lightning will go. For example, if you notice I'm chain lightning this one on the right, it's because if I do it on the middle, it's going to jump to the left one, and then it's not going to count. Like, so I'm not getting the procs here because it's jumping weird and it's not counting that I am in fact hitting this third one, which I'm not always. So keep that in mind. Some bosses like Zul'Harak, when you've got the imps going down, you want to make sure that you're hitting off like the boss because he has a bigger hitbox, and hitboxes do matter. Manarol, same thing with the imps. If you hit off of him, chain lightning, it'll hit most likely hit things and give you procs. One addendum to this is sometimes they're like, again, on Zul'Harak, the imps die very quickly if your group is doing it properly. So you'll do this, and again, earthquake, your number 1 priority. You want to get that down, but once that's down, so notice there's a little cooldown. So you want to get another proc, but you might say this is Zul'Harak. Maybe you want to put a flame shock on him, right? And what this will allow you to do is, while it's down, so while you can't earthquake anymore, you can get these free procs of lava burst, and if you use those on Zul or the boss or whatever you're trying to focus down, it actually gives you a little more damage than just the chain lightning itself. You still prioritize earth shock if it's up, you know, if you've got 20 stacks, and you still prioritize earthquake always. But when you get these free procs, it's just a little extra damage, and it does more than your chain lightning itself, hitting 3 targets. Alright, now chain lightning is probably hitting around 9k, 10k, and lava, and so you hit 3 of those, that's about 28, 30k, and your lava burst is hitting for about 33, 34, so it's a little more damage, and it's more focused damage. So you can help out. So that's like a little extra that a lot of people don't always do. But always earthquake first for AoE. It's your biggest thing. You have to get it going. And then, so after you get those going, if you're going pure AoE, like full on AoE, so get your earthquakes, chain lightning, and then pop liquid magma with the totem up. Make sure your fire totem has enough time on it, because that's important. It lasts 10 seconds, so make sure you have at least 10 seconds left. And you see it just shoots off stuff. Right now it's hitting something it shouldn't be, but that's fine. And that'll just do a lot of AoE damage. So potentially keep flame shocks up on the target you want if it's not like a full fight. So again, on like the first fight, Hellfire Assault, you wouldn't use flame shock because there's really nothing that lasts that long. But on a fight like Zul'Harak, you can, you know, keep the flame shock up so you can switch between your rotations between your AoE and single target. Plus you get these extra procs when you don't have earthquakes up that can do a little extra damage that is more focused for your raid. But generally just chain lightning into earthquake as much as you can, and then liquid magma if you have it ready. Make sure your totem has enough time, and then flame shocks in between if you get procs. Do not, or not flame shocks, I'm sorry, lava bursts. And get rid of your stacks of lightning shield with earth shock. Okay, and that's the AoE rotation. Some fights I actually recommend not taking liquid magma, even though they're kind of AoE, like Zul'Harak, because again the imps die so fast that there's really not that much time, and the flame shock, especially with elemental fusion, will do a lot more damage throughout the fight, and it's more effective damage as well. Plus you can use it on things like the unstable void fiends, which for some groups stay up for a longer time because they're zipping around everywhere. And yeah, in a fight like Archimond, for example, you don't want to. Thank you for the follow. You don't want to. You don't want to spend that much time in phase 2, so the AoE doesn't last the whole fight, and third phase is the big part, so you want to have single target for that. As far as macros, I don't really use many for this character for raid DPS. I do use a couple add-ons. This tracker is Power Auras, which you can use to just make whatever, to track whatever. I track Lightning Shield, I track Flame Shock debuff. You can use that. You could use Tell Me When or Weak Auras, and I'll give you links for those in the description. And yeah, any macros you would just use. The only one, like I said, would be to macro Ascendance with Elemental Mastery if you are not, if you don't have the class trinket. Alright, so that's going to do it for this DPS guide for Elemental Shaman. I hope it was helpful, if you found it useful, and if you liked the video, go ahead and hit it with a like, and feel free to subscribe to the channel. Alright, thanks for watching, and I hope that dummy is hurting. I hope you have a good one.